So as most of you know, I attended the Friedman Conference last weekend. The conference actually ran from Friday through Sunday, but I could only make it down for the weekend. It was a thoroughly enjoyable experience, and it's nice to be around people who believe in and actively promote liberty and freedom. There were some great speakers, and although I didn't see all of them, I managed to see some excellent presentations and meet some great people. Probably the biggest thrill for me was meeting and talking with Mark Latham. He was completely down to earth, very accessible and extremely generous with his time. That and watching Mark Latham and fellow deplorable Ross Cameron deliver their speeches on Sunday to rousing applause were worth the price of admission on their own. And that brings me to the topic of this video, because it's one thing to observe media bias from afar, the way the media pushes particular narratives at the expense of truth and objectivity, and quite another to witness it firsthand. Friedman Liberty Conference, rapturous welcome for Ross Cameron, Mark Latham. Now there's absolutely nothing wrong with that title, it's very accurate. Both Ross Cameron and Mark Latham did receive a rapturous welcome for their session on Sunday, and both their speeches were interrupted several times with rousing applause. But that's about where the truthiness of this article finishes. Mark Latham stood at the back of the room in jacket and jeans, listening intently to a workshop on alternative media. In a little room above Sydney's University of Technology, a group of YouTube commentators who usually hide behind pseudonyms had come to show their faces and share their ideas for taking on the mainstream. So that refers to myself and 4 others who were on a panel titled Alt Media. Funny thing is, I was the only one listed under a pseudonym, and 3 out of the 5 of us have always used nothing but their own name online and shown their faces. Now, what may not be obvious to the reader, but is obvious to me as someone that was there, is the subtle attempts to discredit and ridicule, even the reference to a little room. If you've been to conferences, it was a fairly standard-sized room. It seated about 100, and there was some standing room around the back and edges. It was quite full, so it seemed crowded, but was by no means small. I've definitely been in smaller. The mission, said moderator James Fox Higgins, was to make libertarianism sexy. The men, and men they all were, on the panel seemed to agree their cause suffered from an image problem. One of oddball keyboard warriors camped out in their underwear in their parents' basements. You see, this is where the journalists who don't do their homework discredit themselves. Yes, the panel was all men, but I know of at least one popular female Australian YouTuber who was asked to be on the panel that told me personally that she couldn't make it. And if the journalist had bothered to ask John Humphreys, who was responsible for putting together this panel, then he would have known that. But then you wouldn't be able to weave in your not-so-subtle misogyny angle. And the idea that we all agreed that we suffered from an image problem is just nonsense. I said nothing of the sort. That topic didn't even come up when I spoke. The truth is, there is some commonality as to how we came to get involved in alternative media, but we also have our own motivations. And what was interesting about the panel was its eclectic nature. In fact, I've never personally thought of myself as part of the alt media. I'm just a guy who saw various issues being misrepresented in the mainstream media and tried to present them in a more objective way. And I'm not even sure I'm a libertarian. The political compass test says I am, but I'm more interested in what you think and why, not what you label yourself. Anyway, us libertarians, we're not that cool, admitted Dylan Thomas, known as True Dill Tom. Perhaps to prove the point, Sven Lowe, who works on YouTube channel The Rational Rise with Mr. Higgins, said he consumed 8 hours of YouTube content a day. And again, this is just quote mining. It's not representative of what either Dylan or Sven said. Sven said he watched YouTube for 8 hours a day because he made the conscious choice not to have a TV in his house. Both Sven and Dylan, who'd never spoken in public before, acquitted themselves very well and were very well received by the room. Much better than I was. I was admittedly a little stale. I hadn't spoken in front of a crowd for a long time, and I think the younger guys did much better than I did. But let's plough ahead here. The Friedman Liberty Conference brought together leading libertarians from Australia and overseas for a 3-day freedom fest extolling the virtues of guns, drug legalisation and eliminating taxes. Again, what a caricature. Yes, there was a session on gun laws in Australia chaired by David Lionhelm, which I attended because I didn't know much about it, and it was very informative. But there were sessions on economic reform, free speech, politics, careers, innovation, coalition building, compassion, homeschooling, and more. But you see where they're going with this. But it was a platform for self-styled outsiders of the far right to step out of the shadows, culminating in a show-stopping double feature late on Sunday with Mr. Latham, the former Labor leader, and Ross Cameron, the former federal MP, who on Saturday lost his bid to rejoin the Liberal Party. So there you have it. Don't address arguments, just label people far right. That's all you need to do in modern day journalism. I mean, is this guy even familiar with the political compass test? Libertarians can be of the left as well as the right. Now, I met a lot of people on the weekend, but the idea any of them were of the far right variety is kind of ludicrous. And then to imply that Mark Latham is part of the far right is even more ludicrous. I mean, he even acknowledges as much later on in the article when he says, Mr. Latham, who lost the 2004 election to John Howard, accused Labor of drifting from a pro-market, anti-establishment ethos to embrace political correctness and identity politics in a race to the left with the Greens. And he quotes Latham here, "The Labor Party's goalposts have moved much more than my position. They've abandoned meritocracy. Modern Labor is killing itself with the own goal of identity politics." So I can only assume he doesn't believe what Latham says and that Latham has been seduced by the dark side, or the far right side. Well, maybe author Michael Koziol doesn't believe Mark Latham, but he might believe this. Staff go on strike after Fairfax Media axes 125 newsroom staff. Now look at them. There they go. Out the door. Fairfax journalists walked off the job today after management axed 125 newsroom jobs. Budget coverage by The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian Financial Review is now in jeopardy after journalists voted to strike for 7 days. Well, that makes sense. Make your paper even more unprofitable. Journalists from the Canberra Bureau were photographed walking out of Parliament House, taking their belongings with them. Earlier in the day, Fairfax Media told staff it would take the axe to newsroom managers and print section writers as it cuts 125 staff from its newsrooms. The media company chose World Press Freedom Day to announce it will cut about 25% of its journalists in newsrooms across its print titles, the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, and the Australian Financial Review and websites Brisbane Times and WA Today. The voluntary redundancy round is part of a $30 million cost reduction management announced by Chris Jans, recently appointed Managing Director of Australian Metro Publishing, to safeguard the future of the print titles. Last month, Jans said that tough decisions would reshape the legacy model of traditional media into a more streamlined organisation. Well, that's a bit of corporate speak, isn't it? But let me translate it for you. Our focus on pandering to the politics of a small minority of inner-city elites has backfired, so now we have to fire a bunch of people. Sorry about that. Well, I hope you weren't affected, Michael, but in case you were, there's some good news, although it's not really good news for journalists. You see, Mark Latham's Outsiders announced today on Facebook that they're looking to expand. Mark Latham's Outsiders is expanding to fight PC, identity politics, social engineering and cultural Marxism in our institutions. I'm wanting to hire 4 staff working closely and campaigning with me, a TV, video producer, administrative manager and 2 IT experts. Young goers hungry to win the culture wars and take back our country. Well, I guess that rules out anyone from Fairfax, but it's good to see new media expanding. And whilst we're at it, if you haven't already, you should check out Mark Latham's Outsiders Facebook live stream every Wednesday between 8 and 9 p.m, and check out his YouTube channel link below where you can find all the shows in addition to his man-on-the-street interviews. Well worth subscribing. So is Fairfax a victim of their own manufactured outrage brand of journalism, or is this just part of the ongoing consolidation of mainstream media? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.